In the wake of the Greenpeace protest at Rishi Sunak's North Yorkshire mansion, representatives from the organisation have been speaking to the media. What a great opportunity for journalists to talk about the climate or about the negative effects of North Sea fossil fuel expansion. This was the co-executive director of Greenpeace UK, Ariba Hamid, on the Jeremy Vine show.
Is this something that you were aware was going to happen? Did you sign this off?
Yes, I did. And I think that we were also aware, like the rest of the country, that the Prime Minister and his family were not going to be at home. In fact, this morning when our activists went there, they knocked on the door. There was no answer. There was no visible security. And we have Greenpeace labels behind all the activists taking action. So this was done with utter concern for safety and with meticulous care. And the reason why it was done is because Rishi Sunak, the decision that he has made to max out North Sea oil and gas is a personal one. The buck stops with him. He's the Prime Minister, and he has decided in the middle of a climate emergency to actually pour more fuel on this fire.
But you're going direct to his fire. As Shay said, you could have went to number 10 Downing Street. That would have been a bigger political statement, would it not, than going to his private residence?
I mean, how on earth would it be a bigger political statement at Downing Street? Protests happen all the time outside the gates of Downing Street on Whitehall, and nobody takes any notice unless something particularly spicy happens. And if the host meant that the actual building of number 10 would be the better target, the obvious point is that you wouldn't be able to get near it. You would just be shot straight away. And I also think that there is a point here about holding Rishi Sunak personally responsible. You don't just get to hide behind your job and say, okay, well, this is what I'm doing in a professional capacity, but let me enjoy my life. Let me have a lovely holiday. Let me feel personally undisturbed. Well, no, you're consigning the world to devastation. I think people sitting on your roof is kind of the least of it. Anyway, I wonder, did you pick up on the start of the host's question? Were you aware this was going to happen? Did you sign this off? As if this is completely beyond the pale. But let's go back to the clip and see if there's any more pearl clutching we can detect.
As she says, everybody knows what that now looks like. It's identifiable.
Where the Prime Minister lives was not a secret anyway. And again, the important bit here is that he is not in the country. And this is a personal decision.
We have also in the
past we've also in the past delivered petitions and hand-ins outside number 10.
I would like to interject if I can, Ariba. I think it's important that we state some facts. On a global international platform, it was not known where his children and his wife live. You have now let the whole world know that actually this is where he resides. And I think for many parents, it's not about the adult. It's actually whatever work you are doing, fine, target that person in their place of where they work, not their home. Because now, not only do the world know, anyone who doesn't like him, his children, the fact that they are people of colour, are going to target that property.
Can I just actually say, I very much agree with Shay, but I would say there's a more fundamental point here, Ariba, and I think you should consider your position as a consequence of this. You have endorsed, so it appears to me, criminal behaviour. This is an act of criminality. You've trespassed on somebody's property. You have somehow, it may only be a temporary thing that you've done, but you have desecrated, albeit in a temporary way, somebody's property, somebody's private property, and it doesn't matter. I appreciate the point as being a parent. There'll be a lot of people that are watching who aren't parents, who don't have that family concern. You are basically endorsing the right for somebody to trespass on somebody's private property and do what they like because you don't agree with their policies. It would be wrong to do it as Downing Street as well, because again, it would be an act of trespass. But fundamentally, for somebody like yourself to say, we signed it off, I think you should seriously consider what you're doing and what your position is.
I always find Angela Epstein really funny because she always looks like she's delivering you some bad news about your cystitis infection. I thought that was a really ridiculous clip, to be honest, because I think it's totally fair enough to debate tactics. I think it's totally fair enough to debate where the line is, where that ends. But the thing about this kind of media format is that it incentivizes panelists to come up with the most histrionic responses possible. So Shay saying, oh, but what about the people that don't like them because they're people of colour? I mean, I just think that that's actually quite a cynical and tacky weaponization of racism there. You don't have Rishi Sunak being let off desecrating the only planet that we have because he's a person of colour. But Desecrating the only planet we have, that's not what the panelists wanted to discuss. And the idea that the director of Greenpeace should, quote, consider her position for signing off a highly effective and, I believe, necessary intervention. I mean, why? Because it took the argument to the Prime Minister's doorstep? And look, a criticism, which is constantly levelled at Just Stop Oil, is that they target the wrong people. So instead of inconveniencing hardworking Brits, they should take their protest to the politicians who make the decisions. But look what happens when you do. Let's continue.
What Ariba seems to fail to acknowledge, or is choosing not to, or maybe the line isn't clear, is I have asked her, and Shay has in a different sort of way, if it's okay to endorse criminal behaviour because it's the Prime Minister. It's a very simple question. I'd love to know what the answer is, because maybe I'm misunderstanding
Ariba.
What I'm endorsing is holding people who are making decisions that are terrible for all of us to account. This is one way of doing it. This is one way of doing it, to take the message to his home. The impacts of climate, we are going to feel in our homes as well. This is a personal choice that he has made. Therefore, our decision to deliver this message to him personally, to bring it home, as it were. Whose side is he on? Is he on the side of big oil and their burgeoning, obscene profits? Or is he on the side of ordinary people who are struggling to pay their bills?
So is it okay to let his tyres down?
Choice.
Is it okay to let his tyres down because of all the things you just said?
We're not having that conversation. We're having a conversation about bringing a message home, which is about the decision he has taken on North Sea oil and gas.
Ariba,
and that is what we're questioning.
With the greatest of respect, that is rather splitting hairs. I appreciate the passion of your argument. I understand, as Shay said herself, this is not about the nature of protecting the planet. Forget about that for a moment. We all are in agreement we have to protect the planet. What I would say is that I'm just baffled and disappointed and struggling to understand why you find it so hard to say this is criminal behaviour and we're okay with that.
Forget about the planet for a moment. Forget about the planet for a moment, because, we're all in agreement something needs to be done. Just don't do anything. I mean, I think that's such a telling response. Forget about the planet for a moment, because then what that does is that it deliberately decontextualizes the conversation. So instead of having quite a specific conversation where you go, look, we're on course to miss our target for keeping global heating at an average of 1.5 degrees. That is going to make things worse. You're going to have frequent, more extreme weather events, but you're not going to be rendering vast swathes of the world uninhabitable. In that context, where we're on course to miss that target, where we're developing new fossil fuel extraction, which means that we're going to be undoing all the work that we've done to cut our emissions, what's morally justifiable? And I think that people aren't necessarily going to agree, but at least you can have an adult conversation. Instead of that, you have to go, well, pretend the context doesn't exist. Pretend that this existential threat to human life doesn't exist, so then I can condemn you the way I would as if we weren't talking about climate change. And of course, when we talk about what's morally permissible, morally justifiable, it does shift with the context. Generally, I would say killing people, bad. If I had a time machine, I'd go back and I'd kill baby Hitler, right? Wouldn't do that for everyone, would do that because of a very specific context. I'm being facetious, but I'm only being marginally less idiotic than the people on that show. So the conclusion of the debate playing out in the media is that it's wrong to stage actions that involve ordinary people. And it's also wrong, maybe it's even more wrong, to stage actions that involve the politicians whose policies are driving the climate catastrophe. As much as it pains me, I want to play one more clip from that show. Here, the host begins by reading out a message from a member of the public.
Sharon on Facebook says, they are terrorists. This is referring to Greenpeace, Ariba. No weapons but causing fear and distress. I want to keep our planet safe, but these tactics are not acceptable. So online people, comparing you to terrorists.
Well, we knocked on the door and had a nice chat with the House staff. We knew that he wasn't there. This is a peaceful protest. We have a history of peaceful protests. So I would think that's an absurd comparison.
A history of peaceful protests, I mean, peaceful perhaps, but, we on this show have now spent several minutes discussing your methods of protest and very little about the oil and gas that you're protesting about. So would it be fair to say that perhaps your methods of protests are not providing the impact and the effect that you would have wanted?
So you can see the absurdity of the media machine in action here. You've got one comment from a viewer, which the producers of the show picked out themselves. This one comment means that Ariba Hamid has to entertain the frankly laughable claim that Greenpeace are terrorists. And then to top it off, the host then blames the editorial framing of the issue on the guest. So they spent 16 minutes talking about the Greenpeace action, almost all of it focused on the tactics, not Sunak's oil and gas expansion. And that was their editorial choice, not Greenpeace's. And let's not forget, if Greenpeace, like Just Stop Oil, had not decided to take the attention-grabbing action like this, they wouldn't even be sitting in the studio with a chance to be heard. Is there any kind of protest that would be acceptable to the British media?
Well, it doesn't look like it, does it? I mean, I must say that the sort of drift of the conversation here actually has quite an ominous, something underneath it that's quite ominous is this sort of authoritarianism, the incipient authoritarianism about it. There are a bunch of people doing a peaceful protest of the kind, exactly as Ariba said, that Greenpeace have always done. They were set up to do these sort of environmental stunts. You know, that's what they've done for like 40, 50 years now. Getting referred to as terrorists, the sort of calls that you start to see knocking around for Just Stop Oil to be banned and this sort of thing. You can kind of see where the politics lines up in this. That it gets increasingly difficult to protest. And then you start to move into like, oh, well, actually, these organizations themselves, they're a problem that we need to clamp down on. These groups of people organizing and talking about these things in particular is a problem. So no, on that level, it doesn't look like any protests are acceptable. Although, of course, some of us with longer memories might remember the road fuel protests of the early 2000s or the Countryside Alliance, when, of course, there were a very different set of people protesting against, at the time, the Labour government, in line with actually some of what our esteemed press was saying about, you know, the need to cut fuel oil taxes, the need to protect our countryside as the Countryside Alliance defined it. Much nicer treatment in the press, despite all sorts of things they were doing that in different circumstances, the people in that panel would have said, oh, it's criminal, oh, it's illegal, oh, how terrible. But of course they don't. So sometimes, of course, protesters do turn up and they do get a much, much kinder treatment than the kind of stuff you're seeing here.